Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series. My name is Ahnaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Kenneth Abramowitz, the founder and president of Save the West and the author of The Multifront War, Defending America from Political Islam, China, Russia, Pandemics, and Racial Strife. He joins us today to discuss the Biden administration and the last Trump administration's respective approaches to Islamism and the Middle East. Mr. Abramowitz will speak for 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Kenneth Abramowitz.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with the Middle East Forum, and with indirectly or directly with Daniel Pipes. Daniel Pipes has helped me learn, and the whole Middle East Forum have helped me learn lots of things over the past 25 years since I embarked on an endeavor after 9/11 to teach myself national security. And to teach myself, I needed teachers, professors, and Daniel was one of the bright lights that helped me learn through his talks, through his writings, and through all that the Middle East Forum does. So I'm happy to be here and return some of the favor that Middle East Forum has given to me over the years. Now, let me just give 1 minute of philosophy before I start. The battle that we're fighting is the battle between good and evil. It's the battle between dictatorships and democracies. About half the people in the world live in a dictatorship, half the people live in a democracy. The dictatorships have declared war on democracies, and I call that World War III. But if you go back in history, we've always been in a war between democracies and dictatorships. And so you can also call it World War I. Call it a never-ending battle between good and evil. I have a summary statement about good and evil, and that is good countries, governments, people believe in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 100% of the population. Evil countries believe in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 10% of the population. In other words, it's we the people versus they the elites. And so as a final point, I color code the forces of evil red, green, and blue. Red for the communists, that's China, Russia, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, among others. The greens, the Islamists, not Islam, Islamists. People, countries who use Islam as a political weapon. And that would be Iran on the Shiite side, which is 15% of Muslims or so. And on the Sunni side, Turkey and Qatar, Pakistan financing the Muslim Brotherhood. And then on the blue side, color-coded blue for the United Nations, color of their helmets. So that's the globalists. That would be the UN, World Economic Forum, drug cartels, and social media companies. So you put the reds, greens, and the blues, those are all dictatorships. They're all unelected, and they're all trying to impose their will on the democracies. So that's the end of the philosophy lesson. Now let me answer the question of the day. Let's look at how in recent history, last 20 years or so, our US government has handled the Middle East. Let's start with Obama 1 and 2, because that feeds into Biden. Biden is really Obama 3. So let's just spend a minute on the history of Obama 1 and 2. Under the theory of Obama 1 and 2, which, according to my terminology, was a government dedicated to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 10% of the population. And it was riddled with foreign agents, as is Obama 3, who make up the reds, the greens, and the blues. So the policies in general were policies that favored our foreign enemies, but they weren't American policies. So Obama 1 and 2 and Biden 1, which is really Obama 3, was really the partial takeover of American foreign policy by our enemies. We didn't look at it at the time. We just called the other party Democrats, but the Democrats were not the Democrats. They were the reds, the greens, and the blues. And most of the policies were designed to benefit the reds, the greens, and the blues. So, for example, under Obama 1 and 2, Israel and Saudi Arabia became, I won't say enemies, but let's just say half friends, half enemies, depending on the day. And the friends became Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood. Because remember, the government was the reds, the greens, and the blues. So they favored Iran, Islamist Iran, and they favored the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood, financed by Turkey, Qatar, Pakistan. Now, these are the two elephants in the room. Pretend the Middle East is a big room or the territory. The two big elephants in the region, and by the way, in the world, but in the region are Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood. Both of them want to take over the Middle East. Both of them want to get rid of Israel. And then both of them want to kill all the Christians. So, in fact, there's a famous expression in terror literature. Christians, Jews, and Hindus will convert to Islam or we're going to kill them. So Iran would agree with that, and the Muslim Brotherhood would agree with that. And so little Israel is basically defending civilization or Western civilization or democracy or Judaism or Christianity from the two elephants in the room. Now, I call both of them death cults. Iran is a physical death cult with its proxies, and Muslim Brotherhood is a cultural death cult. So the difference is, we saw Iran in action on October 7th. They provided weapons and guidance to the Hamas death cult to indiscriminately kill 1,200 Israelis, which included Christians, included Muslims, included tourists. It just didn't matter. They're a death cult. So death cults don't distinguish who they kill. I mean, I call them Islamo-Nazis. I mean, at least the Nazis had reasons, false reasons, to kill these people or those people. But these Islamo-Nazis, they're just a death cult. So they just like kill everybody. The Muslim Brotherhood is different than the Iran death cult. They're a cultural death cult. And so they have mosques and schools and newspapers and internet sites, and they provide an ideology which dehumanizes Jews, Christians, and Hindus, which then sets the stage for eventually killing them. You could call them pre-violent as opposed to violent. So the Obama 1 and 2 and Obama 3 favored the Islamist countries, favored Iran, elephant death cult, and the Muslim Brotherhood, elephant death cult. It also supported a Palestinian state, which they knew would be taken over within seconds by either the Iran death cult or the Muslim Brotherhood death cult, and provide a mortal threat to Israel. But they didn't care because they were the government of the Reds, Greens, and the Blues, and they were supporting the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues. They were also anti-settlement, in quote, settlement of Judea and Samaria, the biblical homeland of Israel. They didn't want Israel to build new settlements because they wanted that land dedicated to the Palestinian state, which they then knew would get taken over by Iran or the Muslim Brotherhood. And there never will be a Palestinian state. If there were, pretend to be a Palestinian state, in one day, Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood will invade it, as we saw in Gaza. Gaza was a perfect example of a so to speak, Palestinian state or entity or territory or strip, whatever you want to call it, was very quickly taken over by both Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood, called Hamas. Now, let's go to Trump 1. Trump 1 tried to reverse this because Trump represented life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 100% of the people, not life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 10% of the people. So he was not an agent of the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues. So Saudi Arabia became a friend again. Israel became a friend again. And the Iranian deal, the JCPOA, which was a phony deal, never signed, by the way. And Iran got about $150 billion of sanction relief in return for not producing a nuclear weapon, but they could do everything else other than produce a nuclear weapon. So they built up all the capabilities of a nuclear weapon without actually theoretically producing one. And by the way, in Biden 1, which was really Obama 3, they went back to the JCPOA, but they didn't actually create a formal deal. They created an informal deal, which was never reported. But I could see by the way everyone behaved that there was an informal deal with Iran, never signed. But Biden gave them $100 billion of trade sanction relief. And in return, Iran promised not to produce a nuclear bomb on Biden's watch, which of course left America and Israel vulnerable to the day after Biden's watch, which comes up in about 1 month. So, and it never disclosed this to the American public. And because they would get criticism of it, and if it were a treaty, it wouldn't be voted in as a treaty. So it essentially leaves America and Israel at existential risk the day after, namely January 20th, when Trump becomes president. Iran will race for a nuclear bomb. I'm sure they're racing for a nuclear bomb right now. And which will leave a huge mess facing the Trump administration. So let's go to Trump 2. Let's spend a couple of minutes on Trump 2. I'll try to stop in 2-3 minutes, answer some questions. So now let me try to forecast Trump 2 based on Trump 1. So Trump 2 will be a repeat of Trump 1 with some modifications. One modification is Yemen. The Houthis, about 50,000 of them, under proxy of Iran, have been attacking ships on the Suez Canal and more recently directly attacking Israel through drones and missiles. In the U.S. Navy's function in life is to protect the waterways for everybody. And they failed. They failed to protect the Suez Canal. This is like as big embarrassment as you ever get for a superpower. That a bunch of Houthis living in the 7th century with modern weapons provided by Iran is able to close the Suez Canal, and the U.S. military Navy can't do anything about it. Well, our Navy has been attacking, and the Air Force has been attacking the Houthis, but the Houthis still have the ability. This is beyond belief unconscionable. And I expect Trump within a month to basically blow up the Houthis. Not all the 50,000 bad guys, but to find the 10, 20 bad guys running this criminal organization and find their missile sites in whatever mountains they hide things in and blow up the mountains or blow up the entrances in the mountains, blow up their capability. So I expect that the Houthis will, under both American and direct and Israeli attack, will not be a problem in about a month after Trump is elected. Then the question is, what to do about Iran. Well, Trump is just formulating the government, just putting it together. The various people are writing their position papers on various issues. So I'm sure it'll come up to Trump before too long that he has no choice but to blow up Iran's nuclear sites. So the question really is, should America supply Israel and let Israel blow up the nuclear sites, or should America join in? Well, right now, since October 7th, which was a direct attack on Israel and America, but Americans don't know that, Israel's been doing 98% of the fighting. So I expect, even though there's no indication of this, I expect the U.S. Air Force to join the Israeli Air Force to blow up Iran's nuclear sites within 3 months, to blow up their oil refinery, their oil exports, and seek regime change. Trump has publicly said he doesn't like regime change. Now, the irony is he was a victim of regime change by the Chinese when Biden won the election that Biden didn't win. But anyways, Trump was out and Biden was in. So Trump is going to come to the conclusion, although he doesn't know it right now, that we have to have regime change in Iran, and Iran's nuclear sites have to be blown up, and America's bombs are bigger than Israel's bombs. So it's easier for America to blow up the nuclear sites than for Israel to blow up the nuclear sites. So that's change number 2. Change number 3 is no Palestinian state, which is an existential threat to Israel. It's also an existential threat to America, because America needs a strong Israel. And he'll renew relations with Saudi Arabia and seek to bring 5 more countries into the Abraham Accords, or 10 countries into the Abraham Accords. But it only can take place after Iran's blown up. You can't have the Iran death cult, Shiite death cult that's promised to kill Jews, Christians, and Hindus, and all the Sunnis alive and kicking, and have more countries in the Abraham Accords. So I think they'll all join after Iran is replaced by normal human beings as opposed to Satanist devils. And the final point, Trump is very confused about Turkey and Qatar. Turkey, Qatar, and Pakistan, all elements of the Muslim Brotherhood, financing mosques worldwide, schools worldwide, social media worldwide. The other elephant in the room. Trump doesn't know how to treat frenemies. Turkey and Qatar and Pakistan are friends and enemies at the same time. And he's going to have to realize in time that he's got to convince those countries to become friends and stop being enemies and stop funding the Muslim Brotherhood worldwide. Trump doesn't know that just yet. I think it'll become more obvious to him over time. So let me stop here and see what anybody wants to talk about.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your remarks there. We have a question here from Jeff Daub, apologies if I mispronounced that, who asks, for years, you have been correctly framing the conflict in the Middle East as part of a global Western civilizational struggle. Why does the media and many policy wonks consistently fail to view the conflict in those same terms?
Well, the media is part of the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues. They're basically foreign enemies. Now, the news reporters look like Americans, and their bosses, I don't know their bosses, but pretend that I saw their bosses, they look like Americans, but they don't think like Americans. So that's why I call them Reds, Greens, and Blues. So they basically have joined the enemy. Now, one of the reasons this happens, and it happens, it's a repeat of what happens in Israel, is if you're a young reporter and your boss says, oh, go learn something about the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues. They wouldn't use that terminology, but learn something about Russia, China, learn something about Qatar, Turkey, Iran. And you go to those countries and you say, oh, I'm American, I have an American passport, and I have some questions for you, Mr. Prime Minister or staffer or whatever. Pretty soon, you write something and it's not favorable to the Reds, Greens, or Blues, and one of their agents say, "Hey, look, buddy, if you want to live here in our country as a foreign correspondent, you're going to find yourself dead pretty soon if you don't start writing nice things about the Reds, Greens, and Blues." So it always happens that the reporters start becoming partial for the bad guys because the good guys never threaten to kill anybody. Can you imagine you write a bad article about America or Israel or any democracy, and the president or one of his agents calls up and says, "I'm going to kill you"? It doesn't happen in a democracy, but it happens in a dictatorship all the time. So the dictatorships basically intimidate the media to join the false narrative of the Reds, Greens, and Blues. And that's why the media becomes enemies of civilization. It's just normal human nature when people are threatened by bad guys.
Yeah, my personal favorite example of that was when I believe it was the New York Times who referred to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi as a austere religious scholar.
Right.
Uh, Now, you mentioned briefly Biden reverting, albeit informally, to the JCPOA. Can you speak about some of the other ways that the Biden administration has worked to dismantle some of the progress and diplomatic advances made by the Trump administration in the Middle East?
Yes. Well, the first, about $100 billion of sanction relief. Essentially, Iran has been allowed to sell its oil to China. I think China buys 95% of Iranian oil. And it's theoretically forbidden under sanctions, but the U.S. has agreed to not impose sanctions on that oil. So that's $100 billion. That's, in effect, by the way, I hate to say this, the American government is financing the Iranian death cult in all of its killings surrounding Israel. The other way they did it is you can see this when Israel wants to attack Iran, because Iran attacks Israel. Israel and America administration have some negotiations, and they agree to only attack for like one day. And they agree only to attack this site, but not that site. So in effect, America is protecting Iran from an Israeli attack. Well, that was an element of the JCPOA. So now that we have an unofficial JCPOA, it's basically the same as the JCPOA. And under it, Iran doesn't go for a nuke during Obama and now Biden's watch, but in return, America prevents Israel from blowing up Iran's nuclear sites. So you can just see by the behavior of America that it's abiding by the JCPOA, which was never signed. It's not a signed agreement, never agreed by our Senate. It's basically an illegal executive order from the administration, illegally allowing a death cult to gain strength throughout the world. And so that's the first thing Trump did. Well, actually, it took him a year and a half or something like that to get out of the JCPOA number one. But it'll take him like 5 seconds to get out of JCPOA number two, or unofficial extension of that.
All right, thank you. Now, speaking of the Iranian nuclear facilities, and you also briefly touched on this in your discussion, do you think the Israelis are waiting for the presidential inauguration before they take any serious military action against those sites? Or do you think they will jump on the opportunity sooner than later to take them out themselves?
Well, I think one of the reasons, this is just my guess, one of the reasons why Iran has ordered the Houthis to attack Israel nonstop is because Iran wants Israel attacking the Houthis nonstop so that they don't attack Iran, while Iran gets the S-400 defense missiles shield from Russia. So it's a clever game. The Iranians, it's the smartest death cult in the history of death cults in the history of the world. And so right now, Israel's trying to beat up the Houthis, and therefore it distracts them from blowing up Iran. So I think what Israel's saying to itself, the American Navy and Air Force aren't doing their job in Yemen, so we'll do it, even though it's not our job. it's America's job, but America's not acting in its own self-interest for another 30 days. So we'll blow up the Houthis. And then when Trump becomes president, we'll blow up Iran, hopefully with the Americans. But if Trump won't send American bombers, then we'll just do it. So so Israel's focused on the Houthis right now, but every week or so something gets blown up in Iran. So Israel has realized that it can't just focus on the Houthis, that every time the Houthis attack, Israel has to attack the Houthis and Iran simultaneously, and to send Iran a message that you can't just keep sending the Houthi missiles into us, that you're going to pay for it directly, not indirectly.
All right, thank you. Now, while President Trump is a very staunch ally of Israel, a sizable segment of his base is pretty virulently opposed to an American interventionist foreign policy. They want to end the wars, they want to get out of the Middle East, and so on and so forth. How much do you foresee this sphere of influence affecting Trump's foreign policy?
Well, Republicans are roughly 2/3 what I color code yellow, which is the sunlight of Western civilization, and 1/3 white, which I color code isolationist for the surrender flag. And so that 1/3 of the base ties Trump's one of his hands behind his back. So it makes it difficult for him to engage in aggressive military action abroad when 1/3 of the base has been told incorrectly that we don't have to interfere abroad. Well, Iran's promised to kill everyone in America. Death to America, I mean, that's genocide against America. As soon as Iran gets enough nuclear bombs, they're going to kill everyone in America. Okay, so you can't just sit back and say, "Oh, they're joking. They don't really mean it. They just want to kill everyone in Israel. They don't want to kill the Christians." So Trump has an educational campaign coming up, which he doesn't know about just yet. He's got to start explaining to the isolationists that you can't play the World War II game. You can't spend the 1930s saying that what goes on in Europe and England has nothing to do with America, and then you'll find yourself with Pearl Harbor. So, so he's going to become more interventionist, but he doesn't know it just yet. But the first step will be for America planes to blow up the Houthis with Israeli planes. And step number 2 will be American and Israeli planes blowing up Iran nuclear sites. And now his argument will be, I don't start wars, I end wars. So the war was ongoing with the Houthis, I'm going to end it. The war was ongoing with Iran, I'm going to end it. So it still would be consistent with his philosophy to end wars, bring wars to a conclusion. You only bring wars to a conclusion through negotiations or by winning them, or military might. Well, in the Middle East, there's no such thing as negotiations. When you're dealing with a death cult, there's no negotiations possible. So either Iran takes over the world, or the Muslim Brotherhood takes over the world, or America figures out a way to stop them. So for Iran, there's no non-military solution for Iran. For the Muslim Brotherhood, there is non-military solutions, and that is no more mosques. You can't, and you got to close your mosques that you have, because your mosques are really teaching genocide, teaching people to join the Islamist death cult, and we're not going to tolerate those teachings in America. And hopefully the Europeans say the same thing. So there is a non-military solution to Qatar, Turkey, and Pakistan, but there's no, in other words, the Muslim Brotherhood, but there's no non-military solution for the Iran physical death cult.
All right, thank you. Now, we're just about at the end here, but I think we can squeeze in one more question. It is on the question of Turkey. Turkey has always kind of played this game of playing both sides, and now they're backing the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham insurgency that's taken over Syria. How do you think the Trump administration will respond, and what action do you think they will take with regards to Turkey's NATO membership?
Okay, well, that's a loaded question. I'll try to answer it in our last extended 1 or 2 minutes. Trump publicly said a couple of weeks ago when Syria started to fall and the Muslim Brotherhood, Turkey, Qatar, and their troops moved south, central, and then south of Syria. And he said, what goes on in Syria has nothing to do with America. Now, this was, in my terminology, a white statement. Now, it was a surrender flag statement. And he hasn't said it again. I'm sure the other 2/3 of his administration said, Mr. President, you can't say that. Every country is important to America, and you can't just say Syria is irrelevant. So when the next time Trump talks about Syria, he doesn't know this. Hopefully, the good guys around him move policy this way. But what he should have said is that within Syria, that there's 500,000 Christians, and I'm going to protect them. There's several 100,000 Druze who love America. I'm going to protect them. And there's about 2 million Kurds who love America. I'm going to protect them. Now, that doesn't, I'm not saying he's going to say, I'm going to send in 100,000 soldiers. We have about 2,000 soldiers there right now. But Israel's basically going to protect the Druze. If authorized, Israel could protect the Christians. And America should protect the Kurds with a few more soldiers, but just with words. Say, we're going to protect the Kurds. In Turkey, if you touch those Kurds, you're going to be out of NATO, and you're going to be in big trouble economically because we're America, and we're going to make life difficult for you. That's why I say there is non-military solutions for Turkey and Qatar, in other words, words, in diplomacy, in threats and bluster. But as I said before, there's no non-military solution for Iran and its proxies.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We have unfortunately reached the end of our podcast this week. I want to thank you again, Kenneth, for taking the time to join us and giving us your insights.
A pleasure to be with you at any time.
Of course. And before we sign off, is there somewhere where our audience can go if they would like to follow more of your work?
Yes, everyone should sign up for my website, savethewest.com. I write an article every 2 weeks, and they get it as soon as you sign up. There's a pop-up menu that you sign up on. And there's also a link to Amazon. You can also go to Barnes & Noble and other companies and get the book, my Multifront book, war book. It's in its 3rd edition. And so those are the 2 ways to learn from my efforts. And everything I do is a public service, and I'm happy to do it to help people learn. And that's why I appreciate Middle East Forum, because I learned from the Middle East Forum and other organizations and put it all together and create some special insights that I have as a result of that knowledge.
Well, we all appreciate your thankless work and your thankless service. If you're watching this broadcast in the future on the YouTube video, I will be sure to put both of those websites in the video description below, so you can just click the link inside of the description. Now, if you have not already done so, for our viewers and listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the Middle East Forum's YouTube channel, where you can watch this series as well as over 400 of our past podcast episodes. As always, we thank you all again for joining us and for your participation. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope you all have a happy new year. Thanks.
Great.